being funny. This is really weird. Usually people just try to laugh. I have some notes here that about what I want to cover on my phone. So I want to talk about our partners here because it was really an opportunity to bring together some of the best organizations that deal with digital creativity. One of which I want to talk about is the One Club. Is our man from the One Club? There he is, Kevin Swanepoel. I met Kevin very early on in my career. He was one of the people in our business that really started to evaluate digital creativity very early on. He had an award show in 2001. Was that the first one? 2000. 99. So in 1999, Kevin at the One Club decided it was time to start evaluating digital creativity, and he brought together, I would say, probably 15 creative directors. I was the youngest one in the room, but it was Bob Greenberg from RGA. There was a guy from I don't know who, but there's so many people from that business that are now running major shops. And at the time, we were figuring out how to judge digital creative ads and how to do it. And now today, the One Club is an organization that has its feet in China as well as the United States with a separate award show dedicated to digital. And today, he's going to be bringing together some programming specifically about evaluating the future of our business, which is really, really awesome. Miami Ad School, Mahara O'Brien is going to be here later today, and she's a super fantastic person who was a UX designer from AKQA and a creative director, and she now is the director of a school in New York, the first Miami Ad School in New York. Kind of a funny name, Miami Ad School in New York, but she actually is building a team of entrepreneurs from students, and I've been over to the school in Dumbo, New York, which is right over the bridge from Manhattan. And the things they're doing are completely phenomenal and amazing. The students that are coming out of there are trained specifically in developing integrated digital campaigns. And so I think she's talking a little bit around lunchtime. And then the Art Directors Club Germany. It's awesome to have kind of people here that are with the same vision as the Art Directors Club in New York. Really excited to see what they do. There's a couple topics today that we're going to be covering. Ones that I think have impacted marketing for all of our time in advertising marketing. One topic that's going to be spoken about right after I get off the stage is the topic of brand and how digital impacts brands. For so long, direct communication through print, television, and radio advertising was how we communicated. And now through digital, there's this opportunity to create rooms where consumers can interact with brands. And this is very scary for people that are in our position. So we're excited to hear about that. Later on, there's going to be some talks about storytelling and content. And we're going to have some people that are working in very different channels. One of which is augmented reality. Another which is just video creation and looking at that from a different perspective. And another one is actually brand as a channel. Benjamin Palmer is going to be here later talking specifically about how a very large brand created a television network around itself, talking about all the things that it does. This being the first year of Ubercloud, I think it's kind of a challenge to define what it is. But I think it's an opportunity for everyone in the room to give feedback and talk about what we want this to be. I think it's really kind of Christian to create the space for creative people at this conference. Judging from the size of DMEXCO last year and the size of it this year, it apparently doubled in terms of the number of exhibitors. Hopefully next year at this time there'll be twice as many creative people in this room. And hopefully exciting in general. So I'm not going to talk much longer, but you may see me up on some of the panels later. And I just want to say thank you guys all for coming. I think it's going to be really great. So without further ado, let's get the next panel on. EJ, the managing partner with Olins, is going to come up on stage. Hopefully it comes from over there. EJ? There he is. So EJ is going to give a talk, and then he's going to be followed up with questions from Benjamin Palmer, the current president of the Art Directors Club of New York and the CEO of the Barbarian Group.
Yeah.
Are you mic'd up?
I'm mic'd up. Yeah. Thanks, Doug. Morning, everybody. Should have, I'm going to go back a slide. I start this slide and people often think, oh my God, Wolff Olins have rebranded as the Viper Room. Don't worry about it, we haven't. I use this slide to tell a story, so forgive me if you've heard this story before. But it's a story about where I think we are in the practice of brand today. And the Viper Room is a very famous music venue in Los Angeles. And in 1992, Johnny Cash did a series of concerts at the Viper Club. If you know Johnny Cash's career, he'd been out of action 5-6 years. And in that time, hip-hop and rap had transformed the music scene. So as Johnny Cash was preparing for these concerts, that consummate performer was terrified. He's like, I'm not sure I really understand what's going on in music. Music used to have these norms, now it's got these norms. And he admitted to everybody who he talked to about his real trepidation and confusion about what was happening in the world of music. Now, for anybody who knows about those concerts, and people who know about music much more than I do, will tell you that those were the best bits of work that Johnny Cash ever did. I tell that story to make a very similar point to where we are. I don't think we understand what's going on in the world of branding, and some people might want to leave now. But I don't think we know what's going on in branding. I don't think we've got a grasp on how digital technology is fundamentally transforming the practice of branding. And I think acknowledging that is leading to some of the best work of our careers. Because if you look at a company like Wolff Olins, we have been involved, and I'll talk to you about some of the emerging themes and what I call the 3 layers of brand for the 21st century. I'm from Wolff Olins. We've been going for 46 years, and we've done some of the world's, frankly, most iconic brands. And yet, as I said, we don't know what's going on in the world of branding. And we're very excited about that. We're very excited about the fact that we are in uncharted territory, because that leads to such wonderful creative tension and creative exploration. What we talk about and what companies are trying to do is remarkable things in this period of uncertainty. And so we talk about what we try and do is help, and the word is help. Ambitious leaders do remarkable things. We did Orange, we did Tate, we did, which is now one of the most popular museums in the world. We did Red, we did the Olympics logo. I think this afternoon Alex is going to talk about that. It's one of the most exciting times in Wolff Olins. And we did things like GE. I use those not to kind of shout about our credentials. I'm just trying to make the point that 46, 47 years of doing brands to discover that we don't quite understand what's going on in the world of brands. Because the practice of brands, the practice of branding, the 20th century notion that you could create something that became a controlling asset for the organization has fundamentally been challenged. So if you think about all the things that branding has been about, it's been about guidelines, it's been about brand books, it's been about tone of voice, how you define what a brand is. And yet some of the world's most dominant brands today have very little of that. They evolve because customers adopt them. They hand all that power back to customers. That presents really huge challenges to all the notions of 20th century branding. And actually branding, as we still talk about it by and large, is a 20th century concept. And I'll illustrate that with 2 kind of dominant themes from the world of branding. The first for me is illustrated by the Marlboro Man. Now, I don't know if this is an urban myth, but the story goes something like this. Filtered cigarettes was the housewife's cigarette in 50s America. Men didn't smoke filtered cigarettes. As housewives got more and more educated about the dangers of cigarettes, Marlboro found themselves with a problem. our core base doesn't smoke anymore. Who smokes? Well, it's kind of men. It had become a sign of macho-ness. And so we need to take our product from one audience, kind of housewives, to almost the diametrical opposite, kind of macho men. But they didn't change the product. The product remained the same. What they did was invent a story and told a story that made that brand much more relevant to people's lives. And branding emerged in Madison Avenue in the 50s and 60s by these really incredible people who knew how to tell a story about a product that was already invented to the audiences. And they took that story to the environment in which people kind of shared stories and talked about things. They took it to television. They got really well versed in the language and tools of television. So they said to themselves, there's a product, give us your product, and we'll invent a story. Frankly, we'll invent a brand. And that became the practice of branding. Now, there's a really important point, I think, to realize here. The environment of learning about a product was distinct from the environment in which you use the product. You used the shampoo in the shower, you learned about it on the TV. As we increasingly find that distinction no longer holds true, in a world where you experience the utility of a product increasingly on a digital platform, which is also the same platform in which you learn about the product, this decoupling of the product from the story as a practice of branding no longer works. It's a 20th century notion where television was the primary way you learned about a brand, the product was something else, you had two different things, and so you could develop a brand that way. Doesn't work. And I suspect if these guys were working today, because they know that people find out about the brand on the same platform in which they use the brand, the utility and the message can no longer be decoupled, they would have had to develop very different branding practices. So that's kind of one point, just one illustration of the brand as a storytelling technique to sell a product is defunct. It's a 20th century concept. The second kind of concept, which is really interesting, I think, is illustrated by this contrast. And it's this notion on the left that the brand is a position you take. Yeah, the brand is a competitive tool against who you're fighting against, your competitors. And it's a position you take, it's a territory you define, and you run campaigns to defend that position. Every single word I've used there comes from the military. It's a position against the competition, against the enemy, that I defend. It's a territory I defend with campaigns. I run campaigns. Generals use those exact same language. I run campaigns. And that military language of branding really solidified after Michael Porter's 5 Forces in the 70s, that brands have positions that you defend against the competition. What's interesting about that, even if you continue with the military analogy, is that even the military is beginning to not talk that way. Even the military is beginning to think about not what's the position we defend, but how do we integrate ourselves with society? How do we play a role in community? That's why they've had to develop much less the language of force and much more the language of collaboration with communities. But it's interesting that branding continues to be obsessed with positioning, territories, the competition, campaigns. I think in a world where you don't even know who your competition is going to be next week. If you're a telco, years ago, if you were an American telco, you can kind of say, I've got AT&T, I've got Sprint, I've got MCI. That's my competition. As long as I defend against them, I can map their positions. And you've all been in those workshops where you map those kind of positioning territories, and we're going to be distinct by playing in that space. A telco could do that in America 10, 15 years ago. Today, if they do that, if they map that, Google will take them from another angle. Wow. Apple and the iTunes store will come in from somewhere else. Skype will disrupt them from another angle. So in a world where the barriers to enter categories are no longer that well defined, it's not 4 or 5 competitors, it's literally thousands of competitors, including your customers. Competitive positioning as the fundamental way to think about brands doesn't work. We have to switch that from an obsession with our competition to an obsession with our customers. And I think that that leads us to, frankly, some big things we have to realize. That brand is dead. The 20th century definition of brand as positioning to defend market share against my competitors is defunct. It costs businesses too much money. It is not sustainable. It leads to kind of sterile, static brands that lose their relevance really quickly. I'm not done, so don't worry about that. I think there is a 21st century notion of branding, which is really exciting, and I said at the beginning, is leading us to do some of the best work that we've ever seen in brand. And I think where in the 20th century we spoke about positioning, we increasingly, and positioning is a competitive concept, we're increasingly talking about our role, which is much more about what we do in customers' lives. Even from a business point of view, that's a huge concept. Because it means we're no longer kind of defending market share against our competition. It means that commercially what we're trying to do is increase our relevance in the customer's lives and grow our share of wallet. But that means that it's not about campaigns, it's about offerings. It's about constantly innovating to find new ways of, one, being relevant to the customer, and therefore, two, building up our brand. Therefore, the CFO is no longer going to kind of come chasing us because that campaign costs too much money and we need to shave costs by 15%. The CFO is going to kind of invest more because we are a source of new offerings that generate profit. But for the rest of the talk, I want to focus on the last 3 points because I think they fundamentally change the way we think about brands. So whereas before our brand was something we developed against the competition, increasingly it's something we develop with the customer. Whereas before it was therefore, because it was against the competition, a defensive thing, it's increasingly a creative thing. A brand should unleash the creative energy of the entire organization. And finally, whereas and you've all been in these workshops, I've seen some of you in them, where we're trying to define brand values. You have 6 brand values, and every one of them has collaborative in it. They're increasingly about dynamic value, not these abstract concepts that brands have been linked to, but some really clear value that an organization unleashes for its customers. So that's a theory. I just want to kind of land that in some very specific thoughts. The first is that you can summarize all of that by saying that what we did when we built brands in the 20th century was build signposts to make more customers find us. Everything we were doing was pointing to our URL, pointing to our stores, pointing to ourselves. Today, the customer is at the heart. And we've got to go out and find the customer. We've got to go out and figure out how we're going to be relevant to the customer's lives. The customer is at the center of the ecosystem, not the brand. So, I want to now just anchor that in 3 aspects that we think are hugely important and give you some examples of creative work that we're doing in that world. 3 concepts that we think are important for 21st century brand. And I'll talk about them intentionally in layers, and I am stealing and appropriating, probably incorrectly, some of the language of technology, but it's useful for us to make those links. The first is what I'll call the presentation layer, and this makes the most sense to branding people. But the presentation layer is no longer, in a static sense, what do I look like? What's my kind of tone of voice? What are the color palettes? And all those kinds of elements. The presentation layer, frankly, is asking a question. What's the new conversation that our brand wants to have with the customer? And some of the most exciting things that we see happening in the marketplace are brands whose expression, whose presentation leaves space for the customer to populate and evolve it. So we can't create these glossy, finished things. We have to create things that allow the customer to get involved, the users, the participants, frankly, the creative force of the crowd, to get involved and evolve that. And you can see our work for AOL is precisely about that. In fact, if the user and the things they create are not there, it's a white space. There's nothing left. I'm going to play a little video just to bring that to life. We'll try again. Yeah, that will work. So the presentation layer is this thing where we create space, and a term we will often use is generosity, where we actually give back some of the real estate of branding to the user so that they can appropriate our brands and make them what you want to make them. Because the dominant brands of our time, let's face it, are incomplete, and frankly they are nothing without the population of content, of ideas, of expressions, of conversations by the customers. Facebook is nothing unless we contribute to it. YouTube is nothing unless we contribute to it. Skype is nothing unless we contribute to it. So that's the first kind of point. That's about the, I would say, what I would call the presentation layer. But it's not enough. There is a layer beneath that, and one can really think about that as beneath that. If the presentation layer was the conversation that allowed us to talk about value with our customer, the experience layer is how we then interact with that customer to create that value. And the fundamental question we ask here is, what's the new behavior? Because, again, the dominant brands of the 21st century will not be defined by that middle line there, their logo on Google. Google isn't about being blue, red, yellow, blue, green, red. Again, it's not about that. It's not about its positioning statement. It's really about what it lets you to do, the thing at the top and the thing at the bottom. It becomes an action, a behavior that the world adopts. And its icons become the actual interactive things. It really literally becomes the interfaces and the things you interact with to do something. That at the top and that behavior at the bottom define Google, Facebook, Twitter much more than anything else. And that's the second point. So if the first one is the conversation layer, the presentation layer, which is about the conversation, the second is the experience layer, which is about the behavior that this brand gives people that they find really a useful way to get value out of. And I'll talk a bit about some work we're doing with Skype. So the fundamental question for us with Skype, in a world where it's dangerous for that behavior to be described as free internet calling, because it's a business, not a charity, it's got to make some money. What's the behavior that Skype is unleashing on the world? Play the video. The Skype behavior, the behavior that Skype wants the world to think about, that Skype is how you do it, is doing things together whenever you're apart. Now, they used to burn people on stakes for even trying to imagine that I can be one place and somebody else another place and we can communicate and do things and collaborate. That used to be called witchcraft, and people have been killed for that. But Skype is bringing that magic to the world. That behavior that says, increasingly on whatever platform I'm on, wherever I am, regardless of what I want to do, whether it's to share a birthday party, witness the birth of a kid, learn a language, do whatever it is I want to do with somebody who is not with me, Skype is the way to do that. The behavior, the new behavior that Skype wants to unleash in the world is this ability to do things together whenever we're apart. And the Skype S will increasingly become a symbol that the thing I'm doing, whether I'm watching a football game, I'm watching the World Cup final, which obviously will not involve England, but I'm watching that and I want to watch it with somebody who's not with me, Skype is my way to do that. That's what that behavior becomes about. So the first is the presentation layer, which is about the conversation that involves the user to do something. The second is the experience layer, which is about what's this new behavior that people do to find that value. The third is the business layer, and the business layer is much more fundamental. It speaks to the point of actually what's the new value. What are you offering me in really cold, tangible terms, not in conceptual, intangible terms like brand values, but in real terms that I can see how's that useful to me. Because if you think about it, a brand like Spotify is not defined. If you ask customers about Spotify on the street, they won't use words like it's liberating, it's optimistic. They'll talk about the offering. They'll talk about I can get all my music whenever I want it for a small price, or for free. I can listen to music a certain number of times with a few ads. They will speak right to that value. And brands have an opportunity. Technology has opened up all kinds of areas for brands to be defined about that new value that they offer people. But it's not just technology brands that can do that. We're really interested in any single brand thinking, once it starts thinking about its competitive set, thinking about new ways in which it can be valuable. And one of the brands that I think we've had the most success helping think this way is Mercedes-Benz, which by any definition is one of the world's top brands. But it is, or at least it was, largely defined by its competitive set. We make cars, and you can compare an S-Class to an Audi 7 Series, to a BMW 7 Series, or the Audi A8 Series. Actually, what really is the new kind of value that can come from this brand? And this little documentary talks about that.
Ladies and gentlemen, Lewis Hamilton.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the warm welcome.
Formula One star Lewis Hamilton is launching Road Sense, a safety campaign, at a driving academy just outside London.
This opportunity for the students is to have a chance to understand how to drive safely and responsibly.
This is a new venture created by Mercedes-Benz, one of 3 new businesses launched in less than a year. So how did a car maker get into this? In 2007, its parent company Daimler wanted to develop revenue streams from outside the core business. Daimler is a large, complex organisation with tens of thousands of engineers, designers and salespeople, but its very complexity meant launching new ideas proved difficult. Its strength lies in its brand Mercedes-Benz, and so Daimler turned to brand and innovation consultants Wolff Olins. Just 10 months later, 3 brand new ventures were launched. The first was aimed at families, building on the car maker's reputation for quality and trust. Kinderclass helps parents with everything they need to transport their most precious cargo, from car seats to strollers, without compromising on style or elegance.
Any parent will tell you the most important thing is the safety and well-being of your baby. Traditionally here in the UK, there are many manufacturers and sellers of child seats, but nobody actually that cares to fit them and demonstrates to parents. And we wanted to make sure that if anybody bought a vehicle or a child seat from us, that it was indeed correctly fitted.
It's already led to a significant increase in sales of child safety accessories, and it's attracting younger families to the Mercedes-Benz brand. The second new business provides bespoke trips around Europe for groups of 8 to 12 people, all in Mercedes-Benz cars, of course. It was launched in China, an exclusive travel service for the wealthy, named after the iconic Mercedes-Benz model Gullwing. The third new business was the Driving Academy, which launched the Road Sense campaign. It's possibly the first of its kind in the world, teaching driving as a life skill, demonstrating that Mercedes-Benz doesn't just produce safer cars, but helps develop safer drivers, at the same time bringing the brand to younger people.
Before we launched the Driving Academy, we undertook a whole series of market research, and the feedback was that people very much trusted Mercedes-Benz to teach their children to learn to drive.
Do you want to get in the front?
Yeah.
We are already in 6 months of training. We are now teaching over 1,000 people to learn to drive.
Such huge ambition for an already powerful brand has enabled Mercedes-Benz to create 3 very different businesses in just 10 months.
So, as a summary, we've talked about 3 things, but I want to talk about them in reverse order, actually. Because I think that's the way we have to think about brands. And it's the way we have to position creativity as being at the heart of what businesses have to do. And particularly over the next few years, as the Western hemisphere, as the Western world struggles with growth. We're going to need more creativity at the heart of how organizations think about and create new value. So a car company is stuck in the notion that we have to create cars. But actually, what else does that brand allow us to do? How else do we create new value? I think that's what Mercedes-Benz is about. The second thing we have to do as creative people and as brand people is help organizations think about what are the new behaviors that they're enabling. How do people engage with this brand with behaviors that they find really useful, things they couldn't previously do. And I think that's what we're trying to do with Skype, is talk about something that goes beyond a commodity of making free phone calls to really be the platform for people to collaborate and do things together. If you've thought about that clearly, if you know what the new value is and you know how people interact with it, then it's really easy to begin to imagine conversation because you've got the customer at the heart of what you're doing. And so AOL shows how without the customer that the brand literally disappears. We think there's wonderful creative energy in that going forward. And we think it adds up to really playing a fundamental role in people's lives. I'll finish with this. I won't play this video entirely, and I think most of you have seen it, but for me, it encapsulates the opportunity for brands in the 21st century. I think you get the picture. There are these behaviors that increasingly brands will be able to use to create value, and our brands will be the sum total of what people bring to them, not something we develop in the studio in London or New York or Dubai. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Jay. I'm going to invite on the stage right now Benjamin Palmer, the current president of the Art Directors Club, to have a talk with EJ on stage about what we just discussed. Awesome. Welcome aboard.
All right. Yeah, I do have a mic. Hi, guys. How you doing? That was a good talk.
Good. You?
I'm good. I wrote some questions on my phone during your talk. So my first question for you, do you think that the brand is, that what a brand is about in the 21st century is more about the actual experience with the brand versus more for the experience? Like it feels like that's sort of the biggest transition,
Yeah.
you know, that we've made
Yes.
sort of as an industry.
That would be my opinion. It is worth saying that the experience has to have a purpose beyond being cool and different.
Yeah.
It has to, that you have to get this marriage between, I still think poetry and beauty and style, all those things are, if anything, more important than ever before. But it has to plug into a utility for it. Otherwise, it's kind of a cool thing that we do for a while, but there will be loads and loads more options later on. So I think that marriage of utility and experience is fundamental to brands.
Yeah, do you think it makes brands feel like there's something, like I'm extremely pro sort of internet and openness and interactivity, you know, but there's also something that feels like weaker about brands that don't take, like I think about sort of like Facebook, which is all utility and which by many standards is this huge mighty gorilla of a brand because it has like holds so much attention, but at the same time from like a real like emotional brand perspective, like does anyone actually like feel really good when they see the Facebook logo? You know, like do you want to go out there like versus you know Nike, you know, being maybe the polar opposite, you know, nerds and jocks, I guess.
So I think the danger of technology is that you can commoditize anything.
Yeah.
All the things that brands used to do that made us feel special, you can turn into a couple of clicks. You know, the experience people used to have of walking into a store and having a conversation with a really knowledgeable sales assistant who could help you plan your journey, versus going on to booking.com or expedia.com and spending thousands of euros to buy a trip, but it's a few clicks, and taking away all the experiential value of that is the danger. Is the real danger.
Yeah, because you lose the we're adding social to so many. We're adding social to all our advertising campaigns, but are we taking the social aspect away from like the business part of everything?
Absolutely.
You know? Yeah, we're sort of outsourcing our service. So I have another question. A lot of what you're talking about is that the brand is really about sort of the customer and maybe like the totality of everybody's sort of experiences and interaction with the brand. How come we've ended up in that direction versus a brand being about the employees that work at a company? Like, I don't know if like in America, I feel like a little bit of it is because we don't actually make as much stuff anymore, you know?
Yeah.
Like maybe we send that part away, so now it's like actually all marketing, and so like it's more about people interacting with the discussions about the brand. But I don't know, what do you think?
A couple of themes
Yeah.
on that for me. One is compared to our parents' generation, we don't have the same loyalty to our employers.
Very true, yeah. Sure.
And so half the people at Facebook used to work at Google and the other half used to work at Apple.
Yeah.
And so there isn't that loyalty anymore built into
People
that.
don't have like a 25-year job
Absolutely.
anymore.
Now,
Yeah.
you will find different things in some of the emerging markets where you have family-run businesses and there's a real passion about that. I still think, and don't get me wrong, I'm passionate about Olins, and I still think people are really passionate about their jobs. So I think that's just one theme, that increasingly employees are contractors there to do a piece of work and then go off again. But the second point, and I think this is the point you're making, is more important. I think maybe the word customers as the people at the heart of a brand is the wrong word to use. I think we have an ecosystem of participants, and some of those are partners, some of those are customers, and of course some of those are employees. And they have to be at the heart. And that's why it's more than about the conversation. That's why I start with the point about its new value. What's the collaboration that creates that new value? It has to have employees in it. The employees have to be at the heart. And frankly, certainly for Skype, which I know that business very well, the notion of doing things together whenever you're apart doesn't work unless the engineers and talent really buy into that concept. And we talk about these things increasingly as product truths so that the organization can use it to drive the things it makes. The third theme is the one you said. Increasingly, we're not making enough. And I think one of the powers of technology should be to allow us, we talk about this even with Olins for our own people, we need to make more. The world could use so many better things in travel, in education, in politics. It actually does need more things, but those things have to be useful and valuable to people.
Let's take a question from the audience. Who's got one?
Good morning. What kind of people do work at Wolff Olins on jobs like this Mercedes-Benz thing? I mean, it's not a normal job for a copywriter or a visual designer to develop new business models for a client.
Yeah, so we have three things we ask for, and then we don't care what their background is. We care that people are inventive. We care that they're rigorous. They can kind of follow something through. And we care that they're collaborative. And you'd be amazed about how visual designers have ended up as visual designers because they want to make new things in the world, not because they just want to be visual designers. And how when you tap into that depth of rigor and inventiveness, you'll find stuff. So quite a lot of people at Wolff Olins are visual designers and from a copywriting background, but the minute you push them a bit further, you discover some amazing stuff. But we have people who come from architecture, we have a famous author in the place, we have a professor, you know, it is a mix of people. We ask, and we generally don't hire from our, back to the word I've used, our competitors. So there are very few people from our direct competitors of Interbrand, Landor, Enterprise IG. Not because we don't respect those organizations, we really do, but we are looking for people who can, to your point, think differently and not think about branding as it was done in the 20th century. So it's a wide mix of people. I'm an architect.
I think you're next, yeah.
Hi, I'm Mike from G2. I've got a question about these real luxury brands. Let's say like Hermes or Patek Philippe, which are brands that are so huge to me as a consumer that I think there could be a sort of threat by getting too close to them. We'll lose their sex. What do you think about it?
So, a couple of thoughts. One is that brands that manage themselves by scarcity need to continue to do that. I actually don't think Mercedes-Benz falls into that work. The brands you talked about absolutely need to know what is the audience I'm going to engage in. I think that's the first point. The second point, and I'm not a luxury expert, so take all of this with a pinch of salt. The second point is, I think what luxury is evolving really rapidly and is less about the thing and the privilege, and much more about the thinking and how sophisticated that is. It's increasingly about enlightenment as opposed to the badge of the thing. And that opens those brands to new kinds of conversations. So I think there is, yes, a threat to those organizations if they don't become more relevant in a world that's less about badges, and that maybe actually doesn't celebrate anything that sounds exclusive. Everybody wants to be part of the same conversation. I think they have challenges, but I also think they've got great things because they have a depth of heritage and a depth of knowledge that the world is increasingly hungry for. And they have to continue to create scarcity so that only a few can participate.
There's a brand that I was thinking of, which is Ferrari. I was actually on my way to Cologne. I was in Frankfurt. I spent the day in Frankfurt yesterday, and I went to the auto show for a minute. And there's a couple of Ferraris there. And I did not drive any cars, but I've read that Ferrari makes an extremely small percentage of its money from selling the actual cars, and they're actually super picky about who they sell them to now. And they make almost all of their money selling like hats and T-shirts and like the giant new place that they made in Dubai that's like an amusement park. And like that seems like actually like as those types of businesses want to grow, that like the product itself is sort of more just this like it's not a growth industry, but the halo of the brand becomes sort of commoditized. The opposite example is Red Bull, who we've done a little bit of work with, who like their cultural sort of interaction with everyone is so little about like their actual product and so much about like the sort of adventure that comes sort of afterwards. It's really interesting. It's like the best way to make a media company is to pay for it by selling an energy drink instead of selling advertising. Yeah, it's super interesting.